So today in this video, we're going to be creating a program that connects several different concepts. So if you watched my previous videos, we are going to be connecting concepts on constructors, conditional statements, and I'm going to throw a little bit of new concepts at you guys, such as for loops, while loops, and scanner, such as user input, I should say. So we're going to be connecting all those concepts into one video and into really one program. So with that being said, let's get into it. Before we actually get into it, I should say is that I have some comments here, so feel free to take a look at those as we're going through this code and as we're creating everything. The very first thing I want to do is to, of course, import our scanner. So that is the very first line. And the way we do that is just say import java.util.scanner. Okay, so that's it. That's how you write out the import keyword here, and then also just importing our scanner is through writing it in this way. So we're importing it from the util library, from the java.util library, and that is our scanner. So we have our scanner in place. We are ready to ask for user input in the main method. But one big idea I want you guys to consider is that it's the very first kind of line of code. So it's above our actually class name. And again, even before we do anything, before we create our constructors or instance variables, it is the very first line of code. So when you're importing something, it goes above anything else. Awesome. So we got our scanner. The next thing we want to do is to declare our instance variables. So we're going to create 2 integer variables and 1 string variable. So we just do, or I should say we write out private int of Jack, private int of Jimmy, and then private is string of Damien. Random names, but again, key idea in the instance variables, you have to declare them as private, and then the type of the variable, of course, which is 2 ints and then 1 string, as you can see. So we did that. Awesome. The next thing we want to do is to create our default constructor. The way we write that out is say public login or public loop. I don't know why I said login there. Public loop because it's the same name as our class. So that's it. And I'm not passing in anything here. So that's why it's just an empty parentheses, as you can see. And really default constructor, ideally, if you don't want to pass anything, of course, it's just the class name and that's it. Now, the next thing we want to do is to create our method that will pass in the 2 instance variables as we created here, and then we'll use them in connection or in conjunction with a for loop. So how we will write this out is, of course, in creating a method, the very first thing you need to do is public and then the type of the method, int, and then the name of the method can be whatever you want. I'm going to say get integer. And then again, as I mentioned, I'm going to be passing in those 2 integer instance variables. So it was integer of Jack and then integer of Jimmy. Awesome. So our method here is created. And next thing we want to do, as I mentioned, is to create the for loop. In fact, I'm going to be creating a nested for loop, but let's start off with the structure. I want to go over the structure of the for loop. The way you write it out is for, and then you can set Jack equals 0. For Jack is less than or equal to 5. And then we can update Jack by incrementing it. Okay. So let's see what this is doing. So we say, of course, we declared our for loop, right? Or we created our for loop. So for parentheses. The next thing we wrote out here is that I initialized Jack. So I initialized Jack to 0. Then I set a condition. So I said, as long as Jack is less than or equal to 5, then we will update Jack. So again, the big idea here with the for loop is that we have 3 kind of steps inside this parentheses. Either you can declare and initialize or just initialize the variable, set a condition to that variable, and then you can update it. So that is how the general construction of a for loop, how you would create it. Now, as I mentioned, I want to create a nested for loop. Sorry, but again, we can just say for Jimmy is equal to 0. I initialize Jimmy to 0. Actually, let's initialize Jimmy to 1, just to add some variety. So Jimmy is equal to 1 as long as Jimmy is less than or equal to, and this time I'm going to say Jimmy is less than or equal to Jack. And you'll see why. I want to create a upright triangle of numbers. So you'll see the output. We will analyze that. But for this condition, I'm kind of saying Jimmy is less than or equal to Jack. So it's a totally new, different type of condition here. And as long as that is true, Jimmy will be updated by 1 or incremented. Cool. And then as long as all of that is true, we can say system.out.print or not ln, print Jimmy plus a space. Cool. And then I want to create another system.out.println, and then that will create a new line. So of course, if this is totally new to you guys, you probably are kind of confused in how the output will look like, but I'll run this whole program after we create everything. But for now, I want to trace this for loop to show you guys how a nested for loop works. How do you trace it? How does it function? So let's go through one example. So Jack is equal to 0, so I initialize that, and then I said Jack is less than or equal to 5. That is true, 0 is less than 5. Okay, but I don't update it immediately. I go straight to this inner loop. Okay, so I said again, 0 is Jack, 0 is less than 5. That's true. We go to the inner loop. Okay, now let's focus on the inner loop in terms of Jimmy. So Jimmy is equal to 1. Okay, Jimmy is less than or equal to Jack. Jimmy is less than or equal to Jack. No, that is not true. Jimmy is not less than or equal to Jack. Jimmy is actually greater than. So in that case, we will go out here. That will go out to print a new line. And then we will go back to this outer loop. So I said again, Jack is equal to 0. Then we will update it. That is where again Jack will be. So after we go through one process of our inner loop, and as long as that is no longer true, we go through this, and then we go back to our outer loop and we update it. That's our very first thing after we go through one process here. So then Jack is 1, but Jack is still less than 5, right? So then we go to the inner loop. Jimmy is 1. Jimmy is less than 1 or equal to 1. Yes, it is equal to 1. Okay, so then now we can finally print out Jimmy plus a space. So it'll be 1 plus a space. And then we update Jimmy. We don't go straight out because it's still a true condition. It was a true condition. So now Jimmy is 2. But is Jimmy now, since Jimmy is now 2, is it less than Jack? Again, Jack was 1. 2 is not less than 1. 2 is greater than 1. So then we move all the way down here. We get out of this inner loop. We print out a totally new line. And then we go back to the outer loop. And then that whole process again goes over and over and over again until this outer loop actually is no longer true. So the only way for this for loop to stop, and since I create a nested loop here, is for this outer loop to no longer have this condition, to no longer have Jack either less than or equal to 5. And that is, again, that's when our for loop will end. Alright, so we'll take a look at the output after we create everything, but that is a general consensus that I wanted you guys to have in terms of how the for loop runs, how to create a for loop, and just the general format of it. Alright, so we did that. The next thing I want to do is to create our next method, which we will pass in that Damina, or Damien string variable. So we just say, one thing I forgot to do. I forgot to put a return statement at the end of this method. So since it's a method, of course, again, we need to always return something. So we need to say return Jimmy. You can return whatever, but we want to return Jimmy because that's our print value here. So Jimmy is our print value, then we want to return Jimmy. Okay. All right. So now we're ready for the next step, guys. As you can see, I kind of brought the comments up here. So let me bring those all up there. We want to create a method that will pass in, as I mentioned, that string variable, which was string of Damien. Okay. So like the previous method that we created, we say public is string of, and then I already mentioned the name, get voodoo. Again, totally random names. I just made them up. Hopefully they're interesting at least. And then we'll say string of Damien. Okay. Now this is where in this method I'm going to implement a while loop. So a while loop format is while and then condition. And then of course you have the output. So it's much simpler than a for loop, but really all you have here is just the while keyword and then you set a condition. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to make Damien a specific string or set a specific value to Damien as a condition, that is. So how this will look like. So while Damien is, I should say while Damien dot equals Jimmy, system dot out dot println try again. And I should say while not, because I want that condition to be true. But what I'm doing here is I'm saying that if Damien dot equals Jimmy, if Damien is not equal to Jimmy, because of this explanation point here, that means not. So as long as Damien is not this string value, then we will print try again. And then of course I don't want this loop to go over and over and over again, because if I pass in a string value that is not Jimmy, it's going to print out try again, try again, try again, like 500 different times. So another thing I want to do here is to write a break statement, and that will break out of the loop after we process this print statement once. So keep that in mind. And then I will say return Damien as our return statement here. Okay, so we pass in, again, just a simple recap here, we pass in our string Damien value, instance variable, into this method. And then I set a condition here as a while loop, as long as Damien is not equal to Jimmy, then I will print out this statement try again, and then we will break out to that loop after this happens once. And then we will return that string value we inputted, string Damien, after that method is passed, or called, I should say. Awesome. So that is done. Let me bring in these comments a little bit up here. And we did that. The last thing we need to do is to create our main method. So what we do is we say public is static void main string. That should be braces or args. Okay. So we did that. Construct our scanner. So that's where user input comes in. So again, as I mentioned in this comment, we need to create our scanner as an object. So the name of the scanner object, well, what we imported was scanner, I should say. So we will write out is scanner, and then we can name the scanner object as input equals new is scanner system.in. Okay. And then all we need to do now is to ask for user input. So simple as saying system.out.println what first integer value do you want. Okay, that's one print statement. And then our inputted value, we will need to specify that. So we'll say integer of what name did I not use? Integer of James equals input.next int. Okay. So what this is doing is that we're setting, of course, we're declaring and initializing James to that input function as an integer. So this next int value specifies really that the input, the user, or really the user input is going to be an integer value. And we're setting a name to that, of course, as James. We do that one more time for our second integer value. What second integer value do you want? Okay, and then we say integer of Dominic equals input dot next int. So input integer Dominic equals input dot next int, and then lastly system dot out dot println what is string value do you want? Okay, and then the string of equals input dot next. So keep that in mind. I put dot next. Dot next just emphasizes that your input is a string. Awesome. Now, also I did not put this in the comments, but we should have also made our loop or our constructor. So our constructor name was just this one, public loop. So I need to create a name or object for that. So I need to say loop of Jackman equals new loop, and we're ready to go to call our methods and to make everything or run properly. Okay, so we did that. We did all of that. 3 comments out of the way. Okay, so the last thing before we build and run our program is to create a conditional statement, right? To check for a range of particular values for our passed and integer values as inputs, right? So what I want to do here is so with the conditional statement, what I'm going to be doing is to check the input values or certain values that the user inputs. So we set James as our first input value and then Dominic as our other integer input value. So I'll be saying, for example, you can say James is less than or equal to 4 and Dominic is less than or equal to 6. And what this is doing is that it's saying that as long as James is an input value, integer value of either less than or equal to 4, and this double and here, Dominic is less than or equal to 6, then we can say system.out.println of Jackman was our object name for our constructor, so we can say Jackman dot, and then get integer was where we pass in these 2 instance variables. Get integer dot get integer of, and then I will pass in James and Dominic. Okay, and then we can say else, as long as those conditions are not true, system.out.println that is not right, as a simple output value. And then also I want to print out that method that we created for our string, which was get voodoo. So how we write or call this method is just the same way, similar as we called in the get integer. We use our constructor object name, which was Jackman dot get voodoo, not kudu, get voodoo of bro. And one thing I want to mention, you see that I did not really put Jack, Jimmy, and Damien into the methods here. That's because bro, the input names, the names of the input values I put in here, such as Dominic, bro, or James, are technically our instance variables. So essentially IntelliDrive will recognize that the input values that I put in here, their names are equivalent to passing in Jack, Jimmy, and Damien into these methods. So that's why we have no error, and that's why our function, or that's why I should say our program, will run as planned. Awesome. And I think after that we are ready to go. So Let me delete that. Okay, awesome. So let's build our program. So we hit this green play button. The thing that I am prompted by the program is to input a value for our first integer. So we can say, to run this program correctly, let's say it's 4. And then what is our second integer value? We can say 5. And then the string that we want, we can say, in order to, again, run this program correctly, I believe the string value was Jimmy. Yes. So we can say Jimmy. There you go. Okay. So you can see here that we have an interesting output. We have a very interesting output. With the for loop, if you remember, I mentioned we wanted to create an upright triangle, which we did. So you can kind of see here it's 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we also have a 6 here. But it is more or less an upright triangle, which is pretty cool. That's how we created it with the nested for loops. And then we also got Jimmy. And that is true because I didn't get this try again, because I said as long as the output value is not Jimmy, then we get this. But we put in Jimmy. For example, let's run this one more time. So for example, let's say again 4, 5, and then James. There you go. So now it will say try again. It also brought back that string value that we inputted. But you can see here I did not put in Jimmy. That was false. So because we did not input Jimmy, this while loop, the body of the while loop was processed and we got out try again, which is what we of course planned and what we wanted. So that is all of those several concepts compiled into one video. I know it was a lot of stuff, but hopefully this shows you guys how to connect some different concepts together, how to integrate for loops, while loops, hopefully also give you an idea of how those two new concepts of for loops and while loops can function. Again, with the for loops, we create this upright triangle. With the while loop, we just set a condition and we got out certain outputs based on our input, user input. So I know it was a lot of stuff, but hopefully this was helpful, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any other questions, please let me know. Until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in a future video.